Charles. Okay. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. My name is Justina Kanza. I am the founder and the CEO here at Granted. Like I mentioned, I'm joining from Shawnigan Lake on Vancouver Island, but primarily based in Toronto. And Granted is also headquartered in Ontario, in Hamilton, actually. And Granted, a technology platform that really supports end-to-end fundraising for nonprofits like yourselves, and for startups, and for founders, and for artists. And so I'll do a demo of the platform a little bit towards the end, but the objective is to democratize access to funding, because I know how fragmented it can be finding the right grants for you between the multiple spreadsheets, the multiple databases. So we streamline the process from discovery with our database of over 1,500 grants, and also leveraging AI to match you to the right grants, to match not only you and your organization, but specific projects to multiple grants. And then our AI writing assistant, we call her Gigi these days, helps you break down the time that it takes to go from idea to draft to submission ready, as well as managing your grants so you never miss deadlines. And so you're well connected with your funders and on track, and all the good stuff. And I'll share a little bit of a demo about the product a little bit after, but one of the many conversations that we have here is with nonprofits who are really looking to understand what is it that funders are looking for. How do I go from an idea of an initiative or project to actually being funder ready, and to actually being funded or granted in the first place? And so today I am excited to host the lovely Joelle Cabezoso, who is the founder and executive director at Sisters in Sync. She's also a Governor General's Award recipient. She's a 2025 King Charles Coronation Medalist. She's spoken at Forbes. And I see a question if this will be recorded. Yes, this is being recorded. And so Joelle is a social entrepreneur. She's a champion for Black women, girls, and gender equality. And she's dedicated the past few years supporting women and girls, making sure they're in spaces where they can feel seen, heard, and empowered. And along the way, she's actually had the privilege of helping grassroots organizations and nonprofit organizations secure over $3.5 million in grants to bring their visions to life and to make make tangible impact in communities across the. And so today we are so lucky to have Joelle really talk to us about how nonprofits can and grassroots organizations can secure grants in 2026, from how to identify the right grants for your organization, how to craft a winning application, common mistakes to avoid, and any tips to increase chances of approval. Joelle and I were working on an application for a grant a couple of weeks ago, and even in that process of interacting on that application, I learned so much from her. So I'm excited for you guys to hear from her as well. So this won't be like a formal slides presentation conversation. We wanted to keep this open and interactive and conversational, so we can have a back and forth instead of just one person speaking to us and at us. We can have a conversation. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Joelle.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Justina, for that introduction. I'm learning to love to hear myself being introduced. So you did such a beautiful job. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining and for also being flexible. I know we were supposed to meet at 6. I may be good at writing grants, but I'm not good at keeping a schedule. So I completely had a conflict, but I definitely appreciate that you all were able to still join us. And I promise I will be very informative yet engaging, and I won't take too much of your time. Of course, if there's any lingering questions, concerns, anything that you might need support with outside of this presentation, I'm happy to meet with you all. So as Justina said, I am the founder and executive director of Sisters in Sing, a nonprofit organization that I started almost 8 years now. So just like many of you that are joining here today, you're probably at a stage where you're like, okay, I need to fund, whether it's a nonprofit or even a business, but you're probably asking yourself, like, where do I begin? And so I've always been somebody who was scared of asking for money. I don't know what it is, but I always just felt like I needed to do it on my own. And so when I launched Sisters in Sing in 2018, I actually had no idea that grants or anything existed. So I just knew that if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to have to put my money into it. And however else the rest of the funds come, they will come. And it's not until 2020, at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic and the different Black Lives Matter movements that were going on, that I was made aware that there were such a things as grants, where governments or different foundations, different businesses would actually give you funding to go ahead and put an idea together or to launch a business. And so I was made privy of a little bit of some of the challenges that some of you all have. And, I guess I could say I've been in the game for a little while, have seen success, not just for my personal grants, for my organization and my business, but as well as other folks that I have supported along the way. A funny little quick story. It's like one of my clients a couple of years ago, I applied for him for a grant. I applied for my organization as well, and he got it and I didn't get it. I was so shocked. I said, the same person wrote this. So, even though it has been a while in this game and, thankfully we are well funded, it is still a battle. It is still a game of having to continuously go out there and find grants. So some of the challenges that I was made aware of is that many of you are finding or having a hard time finding grants and funding that you are actually eligible for. So if you don't mind and if you're open with it, just maybe drop in the chat section what kind of business or nonprofit that you're operating. And as we kind of go, I would love to actually kind of point out, your organization or your business and maybe talk about different strategies, kind of using you as an example. So that's one of the challenges that we have here. Another one is knowing where and how to identify the right funding opportunities. If there's one thing that I will say today that I really want you to remember, it's going to be around knowing where and how to actually identify those opportunities. Because a lot of the times we can get stuck not knowing exactly where to go, or you know where to go and that's the only place that you stay at, right? And so we really want to make sure that you know your lane, but as businesses, as organizations, you're also expanding into different dimensions that still allow your organization to grow with the funding that you are going to receive or hoping to receive. Another one is how to write a strong grant application. This is also very important, but probably not something that you're going to remember today. We might have to have a follow-up conversation because I think maybe Justina can tell you, like, I can go on, I can pinpoint every little thing about how to write a really strong grant application, but we will touch on a few, small things for you to really kind of get started, because that does play into how you actually do your search. And I know with Granted being kind of the latest and newest platform right now, it actually alleviates, like, I would say half of the struggle that many of us probably have had to go through, even being able to identify. But with AI, you want to make sure that you're not just utilizing those grant writing services, but that you yourself actually know how to write your own grants. And then lastly is gaining clarity on budget metrics and financial requirements. That one is a very, very big thing. And it truly is what will make or break your idea or your organization. So those will be the 4 topics that we'll kind of discuss. And again, like I said, drop anything that you might want in the chat. I'm happy to answer questions as we go. I'm happy to use you as an example as well, just to really bring context into what we're talking about. And again, my apologies if some of you are visual. I am not. So I was having a hard time creating like a PowerPoint, and then I got these and I was like, well, there's no need to create one because it will be more of a conversation. So the first thing is finding grants and funding that you are eligible for. So when I first started Sisters in Saying, I didn't even know where we stood, right? I knew that I wanted to be an organization that helped Black women and girls. And that was kind of full stop. I had no idea of what that actually looked like. I had no idea of where to actually go and get the money. Because when you really think about it, if my target audience is Black women and girls, they're not necessarily the same audience that is going to be funding my project, right? So I had to understand who my beneficiaries are not who my funders are. And so that was one of the biggest gaps for me when I began, was figuring out, okay, how do I reach my audience for them to come to our program, but then also fund these programs so that they can actually access it. So for about 3.5 years, I just focused on my target, which was Black women and girls, right? How can they do this? How can I support them? How can I do this? And I found myself literally bleeding money because I was paying for all of these things in order to have them access our programs and our services for free, right? And so one day I sat down and I said, I don't even got it like that. So I'm not understanding why I'm stretching myself too thin. So I really started to ask myself, if my primary audience in this case is adolescent girls, who will pay for adolescent girls to access my programs? And then I thought, okay, maybe parents, right? So I need to now shift where I'm going. Maybe I'm looking for grants in parent teacher committees. Maybe I'm looking at schools, right? Because schools will often support the development, they'll often support the education or the hobbies of youth. And so I started to really expand and really start to kind of create a map of who we are, what we want to do, and where do we want to go. And then in those in between gaps, I had to now identify who can help us get there, right? Who can help us get even beyond that. And so, in a way, as you're building your organization or your business, or even if you've already built it and it's just now a matter of understanding how you're going to continue to fund it, the biggest thing is shifting how you view who your actual audience is and who your actual target is when it comes to the sustainability of your program. We know that you can get funded with just an idea, right? So that already tells you that technically you don't need to have users, you don't need to have people accessing your programs, right? As long as you have an idea, as long as you've kind of positioned yourself in a way to say, okay, my end goal is not to get grants. My end goal is to acquire customers. My end goal is to have participants for my program. So now how do I shift my strategic plan and my strategic outlook for my organization when it comes to funding? So once you've kind of identified that, for me personally, it really helped to now know where I go for grants. Who here subscribes to newsletters for literally just anything? Like, it doesn't even have to be just newsletter for funding or business newsletters. Okay, I see a few hands going on. One of the things that I'm going to tell you is make it basically your part-time job to subscribe to newsletters for companies that align with where you personally like to spend your money, right? If you're not spending your money somewhere in those areas, chances are they may not align value-wise with the business or the organization that you're creating, aka they're probably not spending their money there, right? They're probably not thinking about funding an organization that maybe, I don't know, serves dogs, but really they're more focused on serving horses, right? Like, really terrible example, but I think you get the point. So I have literally made it my job on how to find funding that I'm eligible for by simply signing up for newsletters, one for company and brands that I personally consume. And one of the things you'll find is almost every organization, almost every business corporation has a social impact or a social responsibility to their consumer. And sometimes it's actually not as obvious, right? Sometimes you actually have to go all the way down to a website, the little fine print that says about us, contact us, our team, our corporate or social responsibility. And that's how you'll actually find out if a company, and again, this could be for both nonprofit or for-profit businesses, that's how you'll know if they have a responsibility to their consumers by providing, whether it's scholarships, whether it's grants, whether it's funding, whether it's investments. And that is a really easy starting point. I know a lot of the times we all want to secure government funding. We all want to, get those multi-year grants. But if there's one thing that I have learned is more often than not, the companies that are willing or able to give $5,000 here, $10,000 there, $20,000 here for 12-month, even 24-month projects, those are the ones that actually help you build your sustainability over time, right? Because as a funder, if I see that you've had, let's say, 5 different grants of $20,000, you've now secured enough for me to say, okay, this person is trusted. Whereas if you're automatically sometimes going for that 300,000 or that 1 million, but there's never been, and again, this goes down to the financial requirements, right? There's no proof that you've ever managed that kind of funding, then oftentimes you automatically kind of are eliminated from that pool, right? From that pool of funding, from that consideration. So finding grants and funders that you are funding that you are eligible for, the first thing would be stay connected, sign up to newsletter for companies, businesses, organizations, even foundations that align with your mission, because I tell you once a year, they will have some sort of responsibility to their community where they will give X amount of dollar. I think last year, Justine and I both learned about Airy Foundation. I had no idea that they even had some sort of scholarship. And so I subscribed because I said, you know what, I buy bras from you guys. I buy, little things from you guys. So if there's a way that I could ever benefit, I want in, right? And little did I know, one day I just get an email, our thingy has opened, apply now for funding. I applied and I got it, right? Same thing with Lululemon. I had no idea that they also gave funding for organizations, for businesses. I just signed up for their newsletter, and one year I just got an email saying apply for the Here to Be grant. And I went ahead and applied, right? And applied and applied, and eventually we finally got it. So these are the little things that we often overlook in our search for funding. We always think that the funding or the money that we're going to get is going to come from some big source or some big investor. Do not overlook the companies and the businesses that you yourself spend your money at, because like I said, and I'll probably keep saying that, oftentimes they do have that responsibility back where they can help you fund your business or fund your nonprofit. I'll stop there for that first point. I don't know if anybody has a question. Anybody wants something clarified? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow?
I see Alethea has her hand up or their hand up. So maybe I'll let those two ask a couple of questions, but I have one question for you, Joel. But Alethea, go ahead.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's nice to
I'm
see you. I
doing
think I have you on LinkedIn.
Oh, do you?
I-
Oh, okay. Because I was looking at the name and I said, wait, her name sounds familiar. Okay, well, it's good to see you in person. I have a question. I just realized because of my practice and the diversity of my private practice, I'm a therapist. I can qualify for three different streams: youth justice, and of course, women, especially Black women. So, do I narrow it down further before I apply for a grant, or do you think it would make sense for me to try to apply for all three streams? And I have written a grant before myself, and I was successful. But I just find now that I want to expand. I noticed I could apply for all different streams.
Mhm. I think you can actually stay where you are in terms of all three of them, because the beautiful thing is Black youth, right? Black girl youth, right? You know what I mean? Like you can write a grant and put all of them together without necessarily having them be three separate types of target groups that you are trying to reach, right? So I think kind of staying where you are, but being very strategic in how you're actually positioning the writing of it, right? So for instance, we had the opportunity to apply for funding for seniors. Again, we are primarily, youth-led organization, but when we use women, that almost changes, but it doesn't necessarily change who our audience is. Our audience remains Black people, right? And so with that, we applied for the grant. And because we said, well, we don't want to lose the core of our organization and our programming, which is youth, how do we incorporate youth into this programming or this funding for seniors, right? And then all of a sudden, we took an existing program that we already had with youth and said, we will match the youth with seniors to create opportunity for cross-generation exchange, right? So right away, we were able to fit into a category that isn't necessarily ours, because the call wasn't programming for youth, they were programming for seniors, but we saw that, wait a minute, youth could still be beneficial while the beneficiaries remain the seniors, right? So we highlighted mainly how we were going to impact the seniors, and the youth just played like a supplement role, right? They were just there to guide them. They were there to bridge that connection. But the way that the resources was going to be spent, was going to be on the seniors, while the youth benefited almost indirectly from it, right? So we were still able to use what our core was, but created in a way where, yeah, we do say we support women, Black women as well. And so that includes Black senior women, right? So kind of looking at it in that way. So you don't necessarily have to step away fully from one or trying to, completely dilute or heighten one other aspect. You can still go with all three. But again, when you're writing your grants and you're identifying the right opportunity, you have to make sure that as a program manager or the funder reading this, that it actually makes sense and that I can see what my ask is, while you also know that your beneficiary are also benefiting from this.
Amazing. Thanks, Joelle. Actually, that brings up one more question for me. I think there's two things that I would be curious to hear from you on. And one is around, because you mentioned finding the corporations and foundations that are aligned with your mission. But before even identifying what alignment is, you yourself has to understand, what is my mission? Like, what are the projects I'm looking to get funded? So if you could speak a little bit about that pre-funding phase where you're actually ready and you're well understanding of what you're looking to get funded, because I think sometimes we jump that step and we go out there to look for funding and spend so much time without really knowing what we want to get funding for. So that's one. And then the second part is around narrative building. And I think part of what I've seen a lot is, like Alithia was mentioning, sometimes we've got this understanding of what lanes we're in and we want to just like stick to our lanes, but we miss out on so many opportunities where we could find a senior grant, for example, where we can actually build a narrative that is aligned with that. So how do we approach, because we want to make our grant search narrow enough that we are not overstretching ourselves so far from our mandate, but also open enough that you can actually find a grant that is on paper not part of your mandate, but you can actually spin it to meet your mandate. And I have an example of this from, well, two examples from my nonprofit. One, my nonprofit supports Black youths around career development, etc. And the city of Toronto had a grant on gun violence. I don't really know much or care so much about gun violence, but we were able to spin up a story, so much so that we went with like, what is the core cause of gun violence and violence of any sort? Most of it is unemployment or underemployment or all of these issues, right? Once you get to those root causes, you're like, okay, so this is what we're going to target for, and then create a project based on that. The same thing with the salon here on the island that I got to get my nails done, and I saw this grant. I'm like, hey, like, this grant has nothing to do with you as a salon. This is like a storytelling digital creator grant, but you can actually spin it up to say, you know what, we're a salon and this is a place where there's so many immigrants and they come to the salon as a safe harbor. So we can actually curate and tell their stories in the salon, and the salon gets the grant for that. But normally they wouldn't have really looked at it that way. So if you feel a little bit about like, what is the fine line between staying in your lane and being open enough to see other opportunities around you?
I absolutely love that, because narrative building is going to be truly what makes or break, right? I've seen sometimes when I'm reviewing grants, people try to make it too research-based or too much word, or honestly over-explaining. So I'll use an example in this kind of question and this scenario. My cousin and I launched a language learning app. The goal was to just teach people how to speak African languages, because we were like, look, we are Congolese, we could barely crack a sentence or two. And so during the pandemic, we would just meet together virtually and start to learn. And one day I saw online there was my sisters were getting bullied because they couldn't speak the language. So we started to open up these lessons and invite people into our family Zoom times when we were learning. And right away, that built a platform. It built a community of people that were eager to learn, that wanted to learn. And we had no idea what to do with it, right? We were still stuck on, wait, no, this was just supposed to be a family initiative. And now there's over 300 people that want us to give them different lessons on different languages, right? And so we asked ourselves, like, how do we even take this to the next level, right? Because at this point, Zoom is no longer a capacity for us. I can't manage, and I was teaching classes of a language I don't even know, right? So we really had to start to think about, how do we actually expand? And so the natural thing when you have an idea like this, I feel nowadays, is to go and create an app, right? The first thing is, let me create an app, or let me start to build a business right away. But what we decided to do was actually build a narrative around it that allowed people to connect so much to the point that they were the ones asking us to actually build something that they would use. So when you talk about, Justina, sometimes how do we even start to identify those grants when we need to build something first or need to identify what our offering or a program is truly find one thing, stick to it, and be really, really good at it. Like, actually, you don't even have to be really good at it. You could just be the one person that does it. We have just expanded in the last year when it comes to my organization to adding other programs. So for the last 6 years, all we did was run one simple program. And we worked on that program so much to the point where it was like, you almost had to fund us because we're not doing anything else. We're just focusing on refining. When we get denied one application, we're not saying, okay, we're going to go and maybe this call is, for, I don't know, clean tech. Let me just go and focus that. No, I really encourage people to like stay focused on the one idea and get good at it. Even if it's not the best, even if it's not, where you need it to be, as long as you've stuck to one idea or one stream to a point where when you tell the story, people are literally begging you to give them that product without you necessarily having that product. One of the mistakes that we learned early on when we were offering those lessons is the minute we got a grant, we started to build. We started to build an app, not even without the demand because people wanted the space, but we just started to build based off of like what we thought we wanted, what we thought other people would want. And child, we spent a lot of money, right? Learning things where it was like, wait, people just wanted a space. People just wanted to connect. They didn't want all of this extravagant things that we focus so much on delivering and on building that when we started to apply for grants, we were overcomplicating our narrative. We were talking about AI, we were talking about this, when really at the core, people just wanted a place to connect. Right? So it's really, really important that as you're building those narratives, as you're really identifying as well those sources, is to you yourself understand the story that you're telling. Anytime I do a pitch competition, I always say that my motivation for having this app is to clap back at aunties who ask me why I'm not married. And that's my sole motivation, right? I don't want to learn nothing else. I just want to say, auntie, you're single too in Lingala. And so I found that as I shared that narrative and I told that story, more people related. And I kid you not, we actually had a funder come and say, wow, I really like this. I can relate. And they wanted to give us money for our app, right? So it's a matter of understanding and being so, what's the word? So certain about what your idea is that you're not just going to chase money for the sake of being able to have money, because then if you can't deliver on some of those requirements, you will stop yourself from ever getting money from either that source or from anyone else, right? You, like, realistically, you don't want to be known like that organization or that company that received funding and then you ran off on the plug, right? So really coming down to understand what your one story is and being very good at telling it, but telling it even when you get denied grants, right? So one of the things that for me I had to learn is that when I don't receive an approval for funding, it doesn't mean that ends there. It means I need to pick up the phone and call that project manager and build a relationship with them. So that's another big thing about how you're going to tell your narrative. The first grant we ever got was because I bombarded the lady with so many questions to the point where she called me and she said, you know what? Let me help you just fix your application because I really like what you have going on here. You just don't know how to tell a story. Right? So really looking at those rejection as an opportunity for relationship building, right? So rejection, relationship building, that might be a little R squared, something like that. But do not take that rejection as something that you kind of just move on from, but that you actually use as an opportunity to build relationships. A couple of weeks ago, I don't know what I was doing, but I was doing something. And a lady who does grants, she's like, I didn't see your organization apply for funding. I said, oh, honestly, like you guys denied us last time. She's like, well, I wasn't in the role. Please apply. Right? So you build that relation to the point where either you're the first person that they think about, or if they don't notice your name in the pool, they reach out to you. Right? So I think it's really, really important to know your story, be so good at it that even if it takes like a year for you to figure out how you're going to tell the story, stick to that. Apply for things that only resonate to that core story. And once you have it fully down, then you could start to branch off and go for the senior grants, although you're, a youth organization. You can go for the school contracts, or although you're a tech company. So I hope that answered it.
It does, absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, I wonder if any folks have any questions. There's also a couple folks, Joel, in the chat who have added what their organizations are, because I know you wanted to do a case study on how they can structure and strategize. Are you able to see the chat?
No, you know what? I'm not used to Google Meet, so I'm trying to even figure out where all of that is coming
No worries, no worries. Okay, maybe I'll point out Sherry's. She says their organization is the umbrella for several past student associations for schools in Jamaica. Our members fundraise to help schools back in Jamaica.
Okay. And so with that, how do you impact people here in Canada so that you can support those in Jamaica? Right? So I would say that would be one of the biggest questions to kind of ask yourself, because the reality is, if you want to be able to continue your work in Jamaica, you may not necessarily have access to as much funding in Jamaica as you would in Canada. But we also know that a lot of companies and government are very country or city specific, to a point where you cannot maybe take your money and go spend it in Quebec, because Quebec has its own rules, his own restrictions, right? So what I always tell people, and even for instance, our organization right now, we are moving towards doing more international work, but none of that would have been possible if we weren't impacting and building that relationship here in Canada, beyond asking people to give us money to help people back home. Right? So I think one of the things, especially as you're looking for grants, because you will find grants that will help you do the work that you need in Jamaica while still having a big focus here in Canada. This is probably like a really big stretch, and they're very hard to come by, but the government of Canada through Global Affairs often does give funding for you to do projects in certain countries that they've designated in certain areas. But you always have to ensure that either Canadians are supporting it or Canadians are benefiting from it in a specific way. So I would say, if you haven't already, is to figure out how you can really bridge that gap and build that link between, maybe it's benefiting Jamaican kids here. In turn, it creates kind of a funnel or a tunnel, whatever doesn't look sketchy, back to kids in Jamaica, right? And then now the work that you're doing is not just reaching one place, but it's coming from where you currently are. And then you're giving yourself access to more resources. Because I think even as nonprofits and businesses, it can be hard when we're constantly asking people for money and they don't maybe feel the benefit of it, right? If I got to donate to one more place and I don't even get to go on a trip, or I'm going to lose my mind, right? So for me, it's a matter of, how do you build your organization in a way that impacts here, but that transfers that impact to Jamaica or to wherever else you want to reach?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would also add, like, what is the role of Jamaican diasporans here in Canada? Because there's a lot of these like Jamaican Canadian associations. So maybe your funding is not really coming from the Canadian government per se, with the exception of Global Affairs, as Joel gave the example of. But what's the role of like those associations that are already tied to giving back home, or at the very least giving back to the Jamaican community here, right? So you would have to then be creative, as was said earlier, as to who are the people that actually care about the funding. Because again, Joel mentioned this earlier, the people you're funding, the beneficiaries, are not the same as the funders. So you have to identify who are the funders and why do the funders care about the beneficiaries. So that's like the first narrative that you have to build. But Sherry, I see your hand. So.
Yeah, so I just wanted to let you know that I agree with the local impact, and we are a registered nonprofit, and we've been around for 36 years. So what we do locally is we've got a graduates program that every June we do a brunch, and we award minimum 20 scholarships to kids in school here who have Jamaican background. But the benefit is being given to local kids here who are going on to school. We also have a Christmas program where we provide support to seniors and students again, because the international students who are around, and that's not just limited to Jamaicans. We've got people from Africa, different Caribbean countries who have benefit from that. And what we again do a lunch, and we give them, pre-COVID, we used to actually give them a food packet, a basket. Now we give a card so they can go off and buy what they need, like a shopping cart. So I do agree that yes, you have to give something here in order, it can't, it's the way that our chapter is structured as well. That's part of what's required. So yeah.
No, I love that. And also really thinking too about if you didn't have, folks that maybe donated, how would it sustain itself as well, right? Because I think many of us here are in that position, right? It's really knowing that, okay, if let's say people stop donating or people stop purchasing or whatever the case might be, how do we continue to sustain and still have that impact in a way where nobody is affected simply because we no longer have the donors or the programs or whatever that is. But no, I love that. I love that it's definitely that tunnel or funnel, something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll read one more from the chat, Joelle, and then we can do a Q&A. Folks have any additional questions? We are 20 minutes to the hour. Please drop them in the chat and we can go back and forth on them. But Nikita says, our organization, Be There, is developing AI support app, is developing an AI support app. It helps young adults aging out of foster care by giving them guidance and resources to handle adulthood outside of the system.
Okay. And so, Nikita, are you currently offering that service, or is this something that's in development?
Hi, this is something that's in development, but we're currently working on securing funding.
Okay. And have you already developed non-funding or non-financial partnerships or relationships to be able to maybe begin to roll out this app?
That is currently in progress a little bit, yes.
Okay. I love that you said that, because one of the things too that unfortunately gets us as we're either building our businesses or our organization is being stuck on those funding and those financial partners. So when I say that, I mean to say that maybe it's just me, but where we are now at the organization, I actually find it more valuable to have partners where there's that mutual exchange that doesn't always look like financial exchange, because then in those cases you're guaranteed to have, well, maybe not guaranteed if the relationship doesn't go well, but at least you're building a foundation for ongoing relationships. Whereas oftentimes, and I'm sure many of us are finding that to be the case, is you got to keep applying for these grants, right? You got to keep going to investors. You got to keep doing the pitch competitions. You got to keep enrolling for 12-week long programs for $2,000, right? You have to just keep doing these things that don't actually build sustainability. So one of the things that I'm proud of, and I'll encourage you to keep doing, is as you are, of course, looking for those funding, looking to really develop your roadmap for funding, focus also heavily on those partnerships, right? Because what can happen, and what does happen oftentimes, is you may not be the one that gets the funding directly, but you'll find that a lot of organizations and companies sometimes have to get rid of money, right? When they're coming up to their fiscal year and they have to spend a certain amount, or they haven't, they will be at a point where they're looking for partners. They're looking for people that they have a relationship with to actually give you the money and for you to continue doing what you need to do. We found that to be the case a lot in some of the relationships that we have, is we may not even know this funding stream exists, but because we've built this relationship and this partnership with this brand or with this specific person, that it's actually been more beneficial than if we were just to spend hours and hours applying for grants. So I would say this applies for both business and non-for-profit, is really building those strategic partnership, right? So it doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be anything monetary in exchange, but it's simply saying, okay, this is what my app offers. Who do I know at a children's aid, right? Maybe we're using their youth there to test out this app. And then now you've noticed, okay, it's no longer they're testing it out, but they're actually using it. Oh, wait, now the VP is asking, how much does a membership cost for 5 students, right? And then you kind of see it has this role, snowball effect, and you're not necessarily just waiting for a funding to open, but you've built a relationship with people who maybe already have that funding and they're willing to provide that to you, sometimes at no strings attached. So definitely in cases like this, it's good that you're doing that, but definitely hone in on that skills, because you'll find that you'll have a quicker pathway to funding than going the traditional route.
Thank you so much. That's a really great insight.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I can't, to Joel's point, emphasize enough the power of relationships, because I have been in situations where not all grants, the same way, we've got a hidden job market, there is a hidden grants market, because not all grant opportunities are put out for public, like requests for proposals. It's in those relationships, especially towards the end of the fiscal, where they're like, well, we've got $1 million, it has to be spent by March, and it is February 28th. And so you would like have to, those relationships allow for them to say, okay, we know Joel, we know Nikita, so we at least these are folks that we can give the funding to without going through an extensive due diligence. But I think there's a big role that visibility also plays here. I think visibility around like the work your organization is doing, whether it's on social media or when you create these relationships, just giving these stakeholders an update to say, hey, like we're not really asking for anything, but just wanted to share an update that this is a program that we've created. This is, what the impact has been. So yeah, top of mind for folks there. But Nikita, a question and a thought on your on B there also was around, I know the objective is to create this support app, but are you offering any services or like any webinars for these young adults that are looking to get out of foster care and really navigating adulthood outside the system? Because another point that I've seen a lot of nonprofits kind of miss out on, organizations in general, is like waiting until you have the funding to do the most minimal thing, because sometimes the funding is attached to having some sort of proof of concept. So what would it look like if you maybe just did a webinar or two that's offering these services and even using that to gather data? So I don't know if that's something you're doing already, but the more you can do little things like that and document the progress and the process, the more you can then attract funders who are like, okay, so what is your long-term vision? Well, the long-term vision is to have an app so that we can reach more people and scale our impact. That's the kind of language that really attracts folks. But yeah, we have about 15 minutes. Do we have any more questions in the chat? I will pick one more. Well, Kode asks, are there grants available for companies that are in transport and logistics without resorting to loans or financing through the banks?
There definitely are some, and I think this would be more of an offline conversation because it is very specific, but you can start up your business with almost zero money, right? And I think that that's a real reality for a lot of people, but it's a matter of knowing exactly where to go, right? And being able to, like we said earlier, have a narrative that makes sense, even if, let's say, today you want to all of a sudden start applying for, I don't know, climate change grants, right? So that narrative has to kind of carry itself across the different sectors in a way where you're not just benefiting, but that specific company or that funder is also benefiting. So I'm happy to chat with you and meet. I know you've also asked a question about church organizations. Those are very tricky because we know that a lot of the times, companies and organizations may not necessarily attach themselves to one faith or religion. But again, there are opportunities there. It really just is a matter of understanding, like we said earlier, who your demographic is, not your beneficiary, but like who is the person that will actually fund it. So maybe you're not going to other churches to receive that, but you're maybe going to, I don't know, a baseball team that the owner is of a specific faith, right? So it's no longer about the people using that service or accessing your program, but it's about the people that have actually helped build that sustainability for it. Just quickly, I really wanted to touch on gaining clarity on budget metrics and financial requirements. That is such a huge, I cannot stress how huge this is. We were getting us funding for about 2.5 years, and we got so confident. We're like, yeah, we're always going to get it. one little budget mistake and now we don't have that funding, right? So it's going to be really important. And again, I feel like a lot of things are going to tie back to your narrative, but when you are also applying for grants and you're looking for these different sources, how you communicate your budget needs to match to what your actual organization is, right? So even in reviewing, and I've sat on a few committees where I actually approve funding for folks, sometimes you'll have people that will give you an application and the budget has nothing to do with that application. And so if there's an easy and a very quick way to disqualify yourself, it's through your budget. Sometimes they won't even read everything that you have if your budget doesn't make sense, right? So really understanding and being very strategic. I always say have at least like 4 to 6 core things that you always need whenever you're creating your budget. For instance, for us, we now have a physical space for our office. So I know that anytime I'm applying for funding, I need at least to include 6 months, 4 months, 3 months, whatever's month worth of rent in that application, because you'll find that it's very hard to actually get funding for capital, meaning if you want to acquire a business, a physical business or a warehouse or something, you'll have a harder time getting funding for that than you are to maybe buy a laptop or, you know, to pay your staff. So really understanding those requirements. When they say 20% can only be spent on administrative, identify what those core administrative is, right? Because as nonprofits, sometimes you'll find if they're saying that this grant is specifically for outdoor programming, you need to make sure that you're demonstrating how you're going to do outdoor programming, because every dollar has to be attributed to that. But you may have certain things that aren't necessarily outdoor, right? Your rent, your staff, your, I don't know, your printing. So really working even before you decide to apply for a grant, create a budget, create kind of what your non-negotiable are, your administrative things that in every grant, even if you receive 6,000 here, 6,000 there, just for those core things, that's going to be very important. But you also have to be able to tell the story of your budget, right? We are doing a programming, an example, we're doing the programming with the seniors. In that programming, youth are paired up with the seniors and they go on activities once a week. Well, I have to account for how are the youth going to meet these seniors, right? Like, are we expecting the parents to drop them off? No, I have to budget in for transportation, bus tickets, right? But you have to tell that. You can't assume that your funder is just going to know that, you know, the youth are getting there somewhere, right? So you really have to make sure that when you're saying youth are going to be going on these activities, well, how are they getting there? And then when I'm reading that you want to spend $30,000 on bus tickets, it makes sense because you have about $30,000 worth of activities that require movement, right? So biggest way you could really lose out is not even your project aligning, not even that you've been X amount of years in the game. It truly is your budget. And when you find that out, that all you needed to do was provide an invoice or, you know, just clarify why you have 30 youth, but you're only buying 10 bus tickets, you're going to be really frustrated. So that I really just wanted to touch on that because it also ties into that narrative, right? The narrative of how do we tell our story, but that story also looks like knowing which organizations, which companies do you go to, but also what are some of those core things that you need to include in every single budget, even before you begin to apply, because then every budget that you're going to do is going to look different. And then you'll find yourself missing in a specific category that you notice is a core operating expense because you didn't kind of identify what those were to begin with.
Absolutely. I've missed out on some. I don't even want to get into it because it will re-traumatize me. But I've missed out on so much funding for just those little details. I think the name of the game here is coherence, and the name of the game is also intentionality in design. I think I learned this particularly from you, Joelle, around like if you're working, for example, with mothers for a program, intentionality in designing a program and the budget looks like, what does childcare support? How does that go into the budget, right? But with coherence, in my little visual mind, I'm like, I have this huge whiteboard and I have like a whole equation as to how each part of your application, from budget to work plan to everything, like it must make sense because it's telling a story. And what that looks like for me is this the big impacts that you want to bring forth, and that is aligned to what the funder wants to bring forth. And so, for example, reduced unemployment. So that's the big impact that everyone is working towards. Okay, so with these particular projects, what are the outcomes that we're going to bring forth that are going to target reduced unemployment? So for example, we're going to place 10 Black youths into jobs. Great. What activities need to happen to bring that outcome forth? Activities need to be skills training, it needs to be this, it needs to be that. Perfect. Okay, so what are the inputs that support the skills training? You need facilitators, you need space, you need this, you need that. Perfect. To get those things, what does the budget look like so that it can support those inputs, right? So it should all tell a story. And when you're creating that budget now, like they can map it back to the input, they can map it back to the activities, they can map it back to the outcome, and then the big impact, right? So there's like a whole equation that makes sense in my mind. I don't know if it made sense here, but the name of the game is coherence at the end of the day. But yeah, lots of intentionality. And I think part of what helps too is starting the applications early, because if you're applying last minute, as we have in the past, that's when you miss out on all of these little details that you could have had the opportunity to sleep on and pray on and come back with a clearer outlook on them, or like get more eyes on them, right? So starting those applications as early as possible, and then also doing the preliminary work even before you apply for funding, the preliminary work of like, what's this project's going to look like, who are we serving, etc. But also, how much does it cost to run this project? Forget the funding. If we're running this project, like what actually is the budget to run this project? Okay, once you have that set, then now you go and find the funding and align it to what the preliminary budget is. So I would reiterate that for sure. Okay, so with that said, I think I'm gonna, part of a lot of the questions that I've seen in the chat as well have been around like where to find grants for businesses registered and unregistered. I think I see Cody's question here, questions around like grants for logistics, etc. So the huge question seems to be around grant discovery, in addition to obviously grant application and project narrative and such. And this is something that I've put so much intentionality and thought into, having worked in the space for a while, and that's exactly what Granted was built on. So I'll share my screen briefly to show you guys how Granted works and how it can support you from discovering grants, creating these project narratives, and making sure that you're fundable and ready to really like fundraise in the first place. So this is what the platform looks like. When you log in, you would see, I won't go into the details, but you'll see a dashboard where you can create your accounts. When you're creating your account, we want to get as much information as possible about you, including your account organization's type, if it's a for-profit, if it's a non-profit, your organization's details, which you can also enter through voice, because we recognize, especially for racialized folks or for folks who's like me, whose English is not necessarily your first language, it's sometimes more challenging to type it in versus just shalancing about it and talking about it. So we're able to capture all of that information here. But we're also able to capture the projects that you are looking to get funded. So this is an example of a project that we got funding from City of Hamilton on. And when you're creating your project, we really support you leveraging our algorithms to create projects from 3 standpoints. So if you've already done the project before, you can use manual creation, where you just copy and paste the details here. But sometimes you don't really really have a project in the first place. So our AI helps you with that. So you can create some rough notes to say, I want to create a project for Black youths in Hamilton to help them get employed. So just using that small set of rough notes, our AI will create a whole project for you based on what we know about your profile, and distribute it in all of these fields. And then the third one that is also available to you is grants-based creation. So essentially, this is, you have a grant and you don't quite have a project that you want to apply for with that grant, but you know your organization is a fit for the grant based on some of the mandates that are outlined in the grant details. So based on the two data points being the grant details and your organization's details, our algorithm will match those two to create a project that aligns with what the funder is looking for, but also aligns with what your organization's mandates is, right? So those are the three ways that you can create your project. And here you see an example of one of the projects that we created. You're able to see the project narrative. Actually, let me go here because this is a much better look. Perfect. Yeah, you're able to see at the bottom the project rationale, the key beneficiaries and outcomes, timelines and budgets, financial and sustainability, impact and evaluation, which is one thing that we didn't really touch on today, but is very important because funders want to see, if we give you this money, how are we going to go back and evaluate and assess that the funds were actually impactful, the program was actually impactful. So our platform helps you create all of the you're also able to see then grants that are matched particularly to that project, because it's one thing to get a grant that is matched to your organization, but your organization might be doing projects that are in health and then in education and then in sports. So getting a grant that is matched to a particular project really cuts down the time for you. And then you're also able to save all additional documents that are attached to your project here. And how this really supports is now when we come to discovery, now you have a project that you're actually looking for funding for, and you're able to explore grants with much more clarity and much more intentionality. So when you go to our discovery feature, we have over 1,500 grants that should be showing here. And the team is working so tirelessly, I must add, to bring this to over 10,000 grants by the end of the quarter. And these grants are for nonprofits like yourselves. They are for for-profit businesses. They are for startups, for researchers, for students, artists, whoever else in the Canadian landscape that is looking to get funded. We have curated these grants for you, and you can use a traditional filter, as always, to find grants based on provinces, based on beneficiaries, SDGs even, or funder types, etc. But in addition to that, also, you can use our AI search. So this is just like using Google. Say, I'm looking for grants for Black-led businesses based in Ontario, serving Black youths in education. And the algorithm will spit out grants that are specific to your search. So that cuts down your discovery time tremendously. We also have recommended grants here that are based on what we know about your profile that we think you might be a good fit for. And we also should have, I don't know why that's not working, but we should have AI recommendations that are based again on your projects and on your organization. And it also gives you a match percentage. It says this grant is a 50% match. This grant is a 100% match, so that you are allocating your time where it actually matches. Because if it's a 20% match, then why should you be spending your time applying for that grant? And we also have the ability to discover funders. It's one thing to discover grants, but if you can discover a funder, like we talked about, a funder that cares about what you care about, it saves your time so much. And so that now going forward, you don't have to just look for grants aimlessly. You know that I can trust the government of Quebec, for example, to deliver grants on A, B, C, D, and I can always go to them and find opportunities there. So when you click here, you can see all the funding that's offered by the government of Quebec currently. You can see by different funding types. You can see those that are active, those are upcoming, and complexity of applications. So we have a rubric, an internal rubric and algorithm that helps us determine how complicated a grant application is, so that, again, you have that information to save your time. And then for our paid users, we also have this ability to request insights. I think it's very important to get detailed analytics on funders to understand their funding patterns and trends, who they funded in the past, success rates, strategic recommendations, etc. So you're able to request these insights manually, and we've got a research team that creates something for you. But halfway through the year, we also hope to bring the technology onto the platform so that you actually don't have to request, so that you can actually go here and see that last year the government of Quebec gave out $2 million, and they gave it out to this and this and this organization. And we're also working on something called peer prospecting, which is essentially reverse search. So you can go, if Sisters in Sync, for example, Joel's organization is similar to Brothers in Sync, if there's such a thing. So Joel can go and say, okay, who has funded Brothers in Sync in the past? Foundation A, Foundation B, Foundation C. it is quite likely that these three foundations would also fund someone like us. So we can add them to our prospecting list. So we're using our peers to prospect new funders. And that will be coming towards the end of the year. But in the meantime, you can get the strategic reports as part of Discovery. So let's go to one of these grants here. Race to an Inclusive Canada is a good one. So this is a grant that we would have here. And so you can visit the grant website, and this takes you directly to the funder portal where you'll be submitting your application. And you can see all the grant details here. You can analyze your compatibility using AI, how compatible you are to this grant. You can see all the additional notes and such. Sometimes if we have that information, we'll also add contact information so that you know who to reach out to, so that you can build those relationships like we talked about. And the idea here is to save you time. Right, we want to at least do 50 or 60% of the work that can be automated, so that you can fill in the gap with the remaining, 50 or 40 or 30% with building relationships, with running your programs and doing the work that actually matters, instead of doing this tedious automation work that can be automated. And so with this application, with this grant, I can save it here. I can share it across multiple socials. And then one cool thing I really enjoy is our AI assistant. So remember, I already created a project. So I can decide to then just apply for this grant with with our AI writing assistant. So when our team is doing the research to bring the grants onto the platform, they're also bringing all the application questions for this particular grants onto the platform. So when I'm ready to apply for this, I can simply click the project that I'll be applying for funding for this grant, and I can start my application, and it will take me right here to the form. And you can see that the questions have already been pre-answered using the details from my project. So this saves me so much time. I can regenerate and prompt it further with AI, etc. So all of these are essentially answered for me. And so now when I go back to my applications, I can see all the applications that I've started, applications that are in draft, applications that are in review. And once I'm done filling out the questions there, with this example of Amber Women's Grant, I'll be brought to a page like this where all my answers have been filled in. And now I can copy this and I can place it directly in the funder portal where they're asking me these questions. Or if I like, I can export it as a PDF, or I can export it as a Word document and circulate it to whoever it needs to go to get like additional review, etc. And I can also manage my grants here. So using the example of, we can use this example of Race to an Inclusive Canada. So I can view details here. I can manage my grants. I see all my information. I see my progress. I can edit it to see what stage it's in. I can edit the tasks attached to this. So if I'm working with a team, and for some tiers of our subscription model, you're able to collaborate with teams here, 3+ up to 10 additional members. So I can bring in my grant writers, I can bring in my exec directors and start assigning tasks to say, okay, we need to revamp project narrative, for example. This is still in progress and this is high priority. I want this done by this date. And then you assign to whatever email, and then you can tag it. So all of these pieces that really just streamline the process for you tremendously have been built onto the platform. And I think it's pretty good as it is right now, but we have a bit of an overachieving team. And so over the next couple of weeks, there'll be even more features being rolled out, including like a chatbot, almost like a ChatGPT, but a chatbot that you can like really interact with as you're doing these applications. Her name is Gigi. But that will be coming out. And if you're a grant writer or a grant consultant that works with multiple clients, we've also built a dashboard for you where you can actually manage multiple clients' profiles, and their data remains segmented on your own portal. That is can also be white labeled. We have a marketplace where grant writers can offer their services, and folks who need extra support beyond what our technology does can also request grant writers. And we know that you're looking for funding, but you're also looking for multiple ways to just save on costs and run as lean as possible. So we've curated so many additional perks for you, including like discounts on HubSpot, for example. HubSpot is so expensive, but you can get like a 90% off in your first year because we've curated all of these discounts, some from our own partners, some from just out in the cloud that our team has done the research of bringing onto the platform. But yeah, so this is the platform in a nutshell. highly recommend that you check it out. We have a dictionary. I rarely use it because sometimes you can Google everything, but if you need support, and especially when you're so new to grant writing and you just need to understand like what is like a budget narrative, for example, all of these things are defined for you here in our dictionary, because we never want for language to be a barrier to access funding. That's why we're democratizing language, we're democratizing access, democratizing all of these things in the first place. But yeah, that is the platform. I think Iomedia will put in the chat the link to sign up to the platform, as well as I think my email if anyone has any questions and needs to connect and get further support. But this is what the platform looks like for now. I will stop sharing my screen because I haven't been seeing what people are saying or doing here. Yeah, amazing. Any questions, any thoughts before we wrap up? Okay, perfect. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining. I think Joelle has put her email in the chat, but we'll send a follow-up email over the next 24 hours, and it will include all the information that we've talked about today, some of the resources that were shared, as well as our emails and the link to register to Granted. We have another session on February 19th with Grant Thornton, the accounting firm, and you will be specifically for those of you that are building tech products, and you need to understand there's SHRED, there's this grant called SHRED from the government, Scientific Research and Experimental Development Grant, and it's essentially funding, a lot of funding in most cases. I know founders who've gotten millions of dollars of it to do your scientific research and develop your tech products and whatever else. And so we'll have experts that will be talking to us on February 19th around how to prepare yourself for that, how to apply for it, etc. And Iomedia will share that information in the post-webinar package that will be shared over the next 24 hours. But yeah, thanks folks for coming. I hope this has been valuable and informative. I will stay on for the next 5 minutes if anyone has questions, and I'll stop recording now. But thank you for coming and have a great evening.
Thank you.